So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the different looms that I have and that I weave on, because I don't only weave on my big floor loom. I also have some small looms around the house that I use for different things, and they will pop up in different videos, and I thought it might be good to have a place where I just introduce the tools that I use for my weaving. So let's get into that. Today I'm going to talk about which looms that I have, that I weave on, and I felt that a natural place to start is at my biggest loom, which is my only floor loom. And this is my Glimåkra Ideal. It's a 4-shaft counterbalance loom. So counterbalance looms, which is what you almost always find here in Sweden, and I think in Scandinavia in general. The mechanism of counterbalance loom is that they are kind of balanced on each other. So when you press one shaft down, the other one goes up because they're connected to each other with this kind of counterbalance mechanism that goes both this way between these two shafts, but also this way between these two and these two. So this really ingenious but simple balance mechanisms makes it possible for you to raise and lower different combinations of the shafts. And it's a very traditional loom. It was funny, I was actually at a museum just a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a really old counterbalance loom, and it basically just looks like this. Like the wood is a bit older and it's a bit more rough around the edges, but for all intended purposes, they just work exactly the same. That loom was from 1577, so very old. So counterbalance looms are what's called a sinking shed loom, and that's because when you press on one of the treadles, those shafts go down, making the shed sink. Jack looms, for example, which is really common in the US, is rising shed looms. So when you press on a treadle, that shaft goes up, meaning the shed is rising. And that matters because if you read Scandinavian weaving descriptions or weaving patterns, then you might be confused when you weave because it doesn't look like it should, but it might be that you are weaving it upside down because the looms work in the different direction, whether you raise it or you lower it. So you might have that you're weaving the pattern on the underside of your cloth because it's designed for a sinking shed loom, and you might be sitting at a rising shed loom. And the same goes for if you have an American pattern but a Scandinavian type loom. So that's just something you need to think about when you prepare your warp and tie up your loom. It's really easy to just invert the tie up, and as long as you know what kind of loom you have and what the pattern is made for. Back to this loom in particular, I was really lucky. I got this loom for free. They were closing down a communal weaving room, which is quite common these days. And I mean, it's lucky for me, but it's kind of sad. There's a lot of looms just going to the waste pile, basically. So I got this for free. I had an option to choose between 3 different looms. And they were all counterbalance 4-shaft looms, but this was the smallest one. So this Glimåkra Ideal has a weaving width of 90 centimeters, and that for me is the perfect size for kind of my life and my space. Initially we had this in an apartment, now we live in a smaller house, but I do share my living space with other adults. We're 4 people living together, so I can't just say, hey, I'm going to use all of the living room for my 2-meter wide loom. Unfortunately for me, my housemates are super supportive of my weaving, so I can have my floor loom in the living room. And I mean, it's pretty, right? It really gives a really homey feel, I feel, to the living room, and I'm glad that they agree. But yeah, 90 centimeters. I want to upgrade, or I'm in the process, very long process of upgrading to an 8 shaft loom. But then I want to keep the same weaving width, because I feel like 90 centimeters allows me to weave like as wide as I need. I'm not gonna make really big tablecloths. That's not really my thing, or really giant rugs. That's fine that I can't do that, but I can do narrower things. I can do wider scarves. I can do towels. Like, yeah, I'm super happy with this weaving width. So the second loom I'm going to talk about, it's substantially smaller, but probably the loom I've done most of my weaving on. So I have here, it just looks really weird when it's naked, an Ashford knitter's loom. So an Ashford knitter's loom is a rigid heddle loom. And this is the heddle. So the thing about a rigid heddle loom is that you have these plastic heddles. I mean, they were around even before plastic were a thing. I think the oldest ones are made with bone, but the plastic obviously a bit more practical. So these heddles are used both for threading the thread through it and for beading. So whereas on a big one like this, you thread your threads through cloth or metal heddles, or not cloth, string heddles. String or metal heddles. On this, you thread it through this grid, plastic grid, and that is also what's used to bead. So this goes here, and this is like the complete loom. And the thing with the Ashford knitter's loom, I mean, it's a bit confusing that it's called a knitter's loom. It has nothing to do with knitting. I think it was just that they wanted to market it towards knitters, because it's a really good introductory loom if you want to get started with weaving and maybe you are a knitter. But it has nothing to do with knitting. So it's a rigid heddle loom, but there's also the Ashford rigid heddle looms. And the difference between the ones that are called just rigid heddle and the knitter's loom is that this one, you can unscrew the sides here, untighten them, and then it folds up. So it actually takes very little space. It can really easily just be stowed away when it's not used. And it's also really good for traveling and taking it to, because you can fold it up when you have a project on it as well. And I've taken this to kind of knitters night and crafters nights and things like that. I have a bag for it. I popped it on the back of my bike, and I can just take my weaving with me. So that's really nice. And rigid heddle looms are really quick to warp, and really good introductory loom. And you can do a lot on them. I really enjoy having a multi-shaft loom like this one that has 4 shafts, which is the fewest shaft you get on a multi-shaft loom. On a rigid heddle loom, you can only weave tabby-like weaving structure, like the simple, there's a one shed up and one shed down. But honestly, there's so many different things you can do with a weave structure like that, so it's not that you're gonna run out of ideas. So I really like this loom. However, I feel like having used this for a couple of years and also as my main loom, I'm starting to have a little bit of issue like getting it to stick in the open position and not like slip around. So what you do when you weave with this, you have it folded open like this, but on an angle like this, and then you lean it against the table and you put the other half in your lap. And I feel like this part doesn't want to like stick as tight anymore. I've also had one of the sides actually crack for me, but that was probably my fault. I put too much tension on it. You have to be a little bit careful not to over tension your warps on these looms. You don't need to, and I mean, I thought the harder the better, but it's not really the case. So my side cracked, but Ashford was really good. I could order a replacement one. It cost me almost nothing, and it was really easy to change it myself. So big plus for that. And this also have I've upgraded it with a double heddle block. I think that comes now when you buy it, but for me it was an upgrade, which means you can have 2 of these, which makes it so you could actually weave structures that's not only tabby. So you can weave like you have, I think it is then technically a 3 shaft loom. So that also opens up a range of possibilities, and there's a lot of great instructors like Kelly Casanova, for example, that does tutorials and descriptions on how to weave more advanced structures on a rigid heddle loom, and she also does beginner videos. So that's nice. I think if I would be buying only like having only a rigid heddle loom, I would not go for the one that folds if I didn't really need to save the space, or because I think the rigid heddle, the ones that are called rigid heddle, is a bit more sturdy, and I will show you another example of a rigid heddle loom like that I have around and that I weave on sometimes. So this little beauty right here is the Cricut loom. It's the Schacht Cricut loom. So Schacht is the company that makes these. I mean, this shouldn't technically be in the video called my looms, because this is not my loom. It's a loom that I have borrowed from a friend of mine who has the company Limo Design. She's an indie dyer, and she also sells weaving equipment and knitting equipment and other yarn. And we've been starting to cooperate a little bit about creating like simple tutorials and things in Swedish for the rigid heddle loom. So I've borrowed this from her to do some experimenting on, and it's really nifty, this little small one. It's not as wide as the other one that I have. I think I don't remember how wide this is. I will put in some information. My Ashford Knitter's loom is 50 centimeters. So that one is 50, and this is obviously much smaller. This is a pretty small one if this would be your like only go-to loom, but it's so fun to weave on and warp up because it warps up so quickly. I made a couple of scarves on this, and I'm making a tutorial for how to make like woolen, I don't know, things you sit on. No idea what that's called in English. Like if you go to the woods and you want to sit on something and not get cold. Let me know what that's called. So yeah, I really like this, and this is more like what the other Ashford rigid heddle loom I talked about. Like this is one solid piece, and what I haven't woven on an Ashford rigid heddle loom, but I've woven on this, and I really like it. There's wider ones available, so there's one that's 38 centimeters. That's really nice, which suits kind of most beginner needs. You can make like narrower or wider scarves and some like smaller towels and things like that. And this can just sit on a table. It can lean against a table side like this. There's a notch for it right here. But you can also set it on top of a table, and I really enjoyed that I could be standing and weaving. So I have a like my home office table that I could raise up. So I could actually raise it to a good height, and I could be standing and weaving. And that's something that I really liked with this. So really enjoying this little Cricut loom. So this is also another version of the rigid heddle loom. So this is another type of loom that I have, and this is actually, I think, my newest purchase, and this was a bit of a spontaneous purchase because it came out on Facebook Marketplace for really cheap. And I felt like, oh, I don't have one of those, I should just grab it. So this is a table loom. So it's a loom they put on a table, but it's not a rigid heddle loom like the other one. It has the traditional string heddle. So this is a 2-shaft table loom because it's 2 shafts. So in this sense, the weave structures that you can make on it is very similar to the rigid heddle loom because you have the up shed and the down shed, and you use, instead of having treadles like you would on a multi-shaft loom, on a floor loom, that where you push the treadles with your feet, and that changes the sheds and raises and lowers the shafts. On this you use your one hand to move these up and down to change the shed, and then you beat with the beater. And it came with this little reed. And I mean, you can exchange these two, but I only have the one for this small one. So the idea for me to have this is not so much maybe for my own sake, but so that I have a way to show other people that I'm helping to teach how to weave all the different steps in warping a big loom, because it's basically the same as a big floor loom, just a tiny table version. So I can show people how to work with a loom like this on the small table loom, and I can borrow it to people so they can try it out themselves. And actually the first loom that I wove on was a similar one to this, even before I had my first rigid heddle loom, and that's what kind of got me into weaving and awakened my want to know more about this craft. Yeah, that's my table. So this is an Inkle loom, and this is the Schacht Inkle loom. And Inkle looms are used to make bands mainly. This is pretty new to me. I've had it for maybe a month and a half or 2 months or something like that, and I haven't been weaving that much on it yet. But I think it's really, really fun to be able to make your own details and bands for things. It's also something that I feel like I can, if I don't want to bring my Ashford Knitter's loom, this is also something I could bring with me to friends, for example, if we have a knitter's night, and I can sit and do a bit of weaving. I mean, I do some knitting as well, but honestly, I mostly want to weave all the time. So this is like my portable loom. It's not the most portable loom, but I mean, it's like the size of a small instrument. It's fine to bring with you. And you can make bands. You can weave up to 10 centimeters, I think is the maximum width. And it functions a little bit differently. It's really charming, I think. The heddles are these string heddles that you tie, and they're just loops. Schacht has a really good instruction tutorial for this if you're buying an Inkle loom, how to warp it and how to make the looms or the heddles. But what you do is that the different sheds are made by either pushing down on the threads or raising the threads up. So you just use your hand to manipulate the warp, which I think it's so cool with these like really old techniques that just work so well. And another thought I had with this is that I've done some card weaving before, where you have these square cards, really like medieval type weaving, and you can make beautiful bands. And I found it a little bit cumbersome to tie it to myself, and because it's a type of back strap, I guess, weaving, where you have to tie it to you and then tie it to something else, and then it's a mess for me when I need to move. So you can just put the warp for that on here and put the cards on here. So actually the main purpose of me buying this was that I would have a good place to practice my card weaving that I could just like pick up and put away. So I think for social weaving, simple weaving, and for practicing card weaving, that's what the idea for me with this Inkle loom is. And also it's really hard to see a type of loom that you never tried and not want to get it and try it out. So I think that are the looms that I have around that I weave on. I actually have a little Zoom loom in my office that I've also borrowed from Limbo Design. It's not mine. And where you just make little woven squares. It's a pin loom, but I wouldn't classify that as like one of the looms that I do a lot of weaving on. Yeah, if you have any questions about any of the looms, about the counterbalance loom, about choosing rigid heddle looms, or about Inkle looms, although I'm a beginner at Inkle looms, or about table looms, just ask me and I'll do my best to answer your questions or direct you to resources that I think might be useful. See you in the next one.